Hi, and welcome to Still Evolving, where we explore the truth behind lasting performance and resilience. Rather than relying on perfection or superhuman ability, our conversation will highlight how real strength emerges through simple, intentional habits grounded in self-compassion, adaptability, and the ability to grow through life's inevitable setbacks. Today's guest is Alexis Feinberg. Alexis brings more than 12 years of public relations experience, guiding public and private companies through integrated communications, including IPO and M&A activity. She specializes in healthcare and technology storytelling, with media placements in outlets such as Business Insider, Forbes, Good Housekeeping, and CNBC. Currently at ICR Healthcare, Alexis leads client program strategy and translates complex scientific data for key audiences. She holds a master's degree in public relations from Boston University with a minor in research communications. She's an avid reader, a rugby player, baker, and competitive powerlifter. Please welcome Alexis to Still Evolving. Alexis, thank you for joining me on Still Evolving. Grateful to have you and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Why don't we just start off by you sharing with our audience a bit of your journey, where you've been, what you're working on now, challenged by now, and certainly more about your role. So go ahead and kick it off.
Yeah, so I have been in communications and public relations for over 12 years now. I've had a very rewarding career in the healthcare and technology spaces. I started off in public television with Boston's local WGBH station. And then that's where I sort of really dove into healthcare and technology. And now I work as a vice president at ICR Healthcare, where I get to work with some really interesting companies in biotech, other areas of healthcare who really are up and coming as far as innovating what's next for disease states and things like that. But I will say the most rewarding thing about what I do now is I get to tell their stories. And I will say, even as a kid, I thought I was going to be a writer someday, write a book or something along those lines. And although I never accomplished that, I do a lot of storytelling now. So this is how it's evolved. And then in my personal life, I'm a lifelong New Englander. I love to do things like snowmobiling. I'm very active. I've been powerlifting for over 10 years. I play rugby and recently have started to get my feet wet in jujitsu. So my interests definitely are a nice little contrast to what I do in my day to day.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for sharing on that. And certainly it sounds to be a rewarding path. Love hearing of the activities. I'm in Virginia Beach, and so it snowed, which it never does here. And everybody, it's like, oh my gosh, what is happening? It's freezing. So love hearing your passion, especially for the outdoor winter sport. Coming back to your journey along the way, when life has thrown you punches, or if you've had setbacks or adversity, what has helped you continue to evolve, starting from perhaps the public radio or public TV to now where you're at, supporting other firms telling their stories? What's helped you along your journey?
I will say it has been a very winding path, if I'm going to describe it, because I originally went to school for fashion merchandising. And that's where I first got exposed to public relations. And I thought that I was going to focus on fashion communications, fashion PR. I interned at Marie Claire magazine, which was such a rewarding experience, especially getting exposed to all those agencies in New York. But as I started to go down that path, of course, New York City's expensive. I would have to be self-sufficient. And at the time, entry-level positions in that field just wouldn't be able to support that sort of move. And so I really had to refocus, especially because I'm from the Boston area. So I had to refocus. How can I do what I love while being a little bit more readjusted to the realities of what that might look like? And although Boston has and continues to have its own fashion week and has some sort of budding industry, it really isn't as robust as, say, New York or LA or even Miami. But I've always had an interest in health and fitness. Coincidentally, I myself, as I mentioned, I play several sports now. Growing up, I think I tried almost every sport under the sun: soccer, softball, tennis, you name it. So Boston is a huge hub for healthcare. And some of the most major biotech and pharma companies are based here, along with some other really exciting companies in the field. So to try to navigate my path a little better, especially because I found that it was difficult to get a job in entry level for what I wanted to do. So I ended up going to grad school for public relations, especially because a lot of the job descriptions said that you have to have direct experience at a PR agency or doing something like that. And up until that point, I didn't. So I had a very awesome experience at BU School of Communications, met some really great friends there, but that was the launch pad. And that's how I ended up in public television. That came through, although it wasn't in, health and fitness or even fashion, it was just really exciting to work on programming that impacts the entire US. I got to work on shows like Arthur, which I think most people have watched when they were kids, and just a really interesting documentary channel that they had. And so I feel like when I look at my path, then that opened the door for me to be able to do more of what I want. And I think what it comes down to is one, persevering, having a sense of motivation. I've always been motivated to go for what I want, even if it was difficult. And to get there, you also have to be open to the path because you can't predict what is going to happen. You can't predict what's next. You can sort of influence your path and try different things. And that's just sort of how I ended up here in biotech and pharma. It's a very rewarding career that I've had. And those are sort of the elements that got me there.
Yeah, I love that, just the openness and how critical that skill really is. I mean, sometimes people talk about it in terms of attributes. I think it's also something that we can work on, right? And we do it intentionally when we're problem solving. We look to be creative. We look to like other angles that maybe we're not considering or other solutions out there. I really appreciate you highlighting like certainly it's not linear. It's not always as we would ideally prescribe. And yet that openness allows you to find the door that eventually will get you there. That find a way mindset also that you highlighted, right? You haven't ever shied away. Just because it's challenging doesn't mean you can't find a way. And I love hearing how you embrace that, right? Okay, I need to find a way. So maybe grad school is a path. I can get the practical experience that I need to be considered for ultimately the positions and responsibilities that I would much prefer. Super cool. It is a grind though. I'm wondering, Alexis, you talked about the activities the hobbies, the sports that you enjoy. And yet as a human, you're taking on the load of all of it, right? If you go and have a game, you're taking on the physical load, the emotional load, the relational load of that activity, combined then also perhaps with the cognitive load that comes from your work day or the relational load that comes from your work day. So how do you intentionally integrate recovery as a foundation to be able to show up and really find fulfillment, whether that's at work or certainly outside of work?
So I'm glad you asked that because that's something lately I've been working on and struggling with a little bit because on the work side, PR is a career that it's not a 9 to 5. And especially when you work with clients that are in different regions, you're going to be working in different time zones. What's nice is I do work remotely, so I have a lot more flexibility. And something that I think about as far as balancing my personal life is I no longer have a 2 to 3 hour commute every day. And so I can use that time instead to devote it to the activities that I enjoy in my personal life. So I've gone back and forth in the last few months. Like I've been powerlifting for a long time. I really hit my peak right before the pandemic hit. And then of course that happened. Gyms closed down. I wasn't equipped to continue that hobby at home. So I've been rebuilding since then. But then I sort of found a love for rugby about 4 years ago and I started doing that. And, both of those are sports that take a huge toll on your body. So when you talk about recovery, you have to prioritize. And I have a powerlifting coach I work with. And when I am actively in rugby season, he will adjust my training so that I'm not burned out. At the same time, I am in my 30s, one of those people who just came to college, who has all the energy to do everything, sacrifices. And on top of that, I have a life partner and we have a life together. So I need to make sure that I'm devoting focus and time to that relationship, to family. And it all sounds like a lot to juggle. And I think sometimes, especially women, find themselves in this place where they're juggling all these elements of their life. Especially as a millennial, was sort of conditioned to have a high bar for themselves. What I'm working on in Wolf is it's okay to take a rest day, even if you know you should be programmed to do some weightlifting. Or sometimes like this season, I did a lot of reprioritizing. Like rugby, you have a game almost every Saturday in the fall when you're in New England. And I had to miss a lot of games because it was more important to me now to make plans with friends, spend time with my partner on those, prioritize rugby over that. So, all that to say, a lot of it has to do with prioritization. A lot of it has to do with another thing that I would really focus on is just giving yourself a little grace because no one's perfect. Everyone's human. As long as you make small incremental changes or work small incremental actions that get you to where you want to be, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't, things will happen. You'll get sick, things like that. And you just can't be hard on yourself if you don't hit the bar that you've made so high for yourself.
Yeah. Great reminder. Talk about recovery. A lot of times people get into the practice of recovery, whether that's strategic nap or hydration or, light or cold plunge or sauna. We talk about all of the interventions, if you will. First and foremost, though, it starts with attitude, right? And what I hear you talking about when you mentioned prioritization, what I was reminded of is the shift that we saw, especially in high performance domains of sport and military, the attitude shift and the value of what recovery is. Gone are the days that we see it as being lazy, but rather, or a cost to our performance, but rather we see it as the investment in the performance. And so you're right. If your activity level in those sports in particularly, but many people have others, where that load is pretty intense. And then you layer that load, as you described, with what we're dealing with in work. And then you layer that load with what's going on in other relationships, either in our immediate family or outside. Significant load. And so in order to be able to show up in any of those roles, we have to be fueled. And so it's not so much always the focus on the quote overtraining, like what do you need to give up, but how are we fueling to meet those demands? And I really appreciate your realness that it is hard sometimes. I think one thing that can help with the attitude shift is recognizing that you are working hard when you take that recovery day. You are working hard when you sit on the couch and play a board game or watch your favorite show with your partner. That the reason it's work is because that doesn't come by default. You mentioned like being a millennial, setting a high bar, go, go, go. It's work because it's not your default. The default is go to the gym. The default is go for the run. That, believe it or not, even though it's exertion, it may not be as much of work because it's what's most familiar, most comfortable. And yet taking recovery day, engaging in that recovery practice is so critical. And actually that's the hard work. I've said this perhaps on the pod before, but I used to always challenge some of my athletes I worked with. I was like, oh, so you're being lazy. And of course that would get them all riled up. What do you mean I'm being lazy? I was like, yeah, you're going to the gym. A trainer asks you to have an off day. The hard work comes with, can you have that off day?
And you know what? You're not being lazy. Think about it this way. We have never been more connected as human beings as we are now. And that can be exhausting. Think about when you're on a Zoom call after call after call all day. It's exhausting to be on camera. And sometimes you need rest. You turn off your camera. Same thing with sports and fitness. You need to turn off your camera sometimes. And the way I think about it too is like one of my favorite things to do with my partner is we just watch really bad, cheesy movies together and we make fun of it. And so when I decide not to do something like go to the gym or I skip a practice because I know that mentally and physically I need a break.
Yeah.
And what's nice is women tend to recover quicker as far as like weightlifting and things like that, which is nice. But sometimes it's the mental load that is so heavy. So when I do take a break, To me, there's nothing better than sitting on the couch with my partner watching a bad movie, and then I'm spending time with him, but I'm also doing something that is truly relaxing, and you can just let it go a little bit for a while. And you know what? You'll come back to it the next day, and you talk about fueling and things like that, not just brain fuel, but a big thing that I believe in is, you need to eat and you need to eat carbs. You, of course, want to, everyone says you need to have a balanced diet and things like that. But that's another thing that you can't perfect, but you need to make sure you're fueling what you're doing. And, even on your off days, you need to make sure you have a store to fuel your brain, especially, if you're sort of busy going back and forth. And that's really important. So, and
Yeah.
you know what I will say, 5, even 10 years ago in my early 30s, 20, that wasn't a concept to me. It was, you need to do everything and you need to go hard. And honestly, nothing giving myself that grace that I talked about to take that rest. Of course, there's going to be obligations that you have as far as sport and athleticism, but take that rest where you need to.
Right. And certainly applying in the workplace, even beyond sport, like you mentioned, the Zoom marathons, the active recovery breaks that are so critical to fuel. And then certainly you mentioned kind of more of the performance nutrition side of things, right? Like how are you fueling your load with fuel or hydration or supplementation? That healthy dose of self-compassion and giving yourself a break. I appreciate you also sharing on that one, because I think any of us who are like hard drivers, achievers, goal-oriented, it's great to have those high standards, right? And holding ourselves accountable to them. And then also how we can also coach ourselves in a way that can really help us continue to grow and evolve and not kind of break us down as humans. So important. Alexis, we typically wrap the conversation with giving you an opportunity to share back that immediate and actionable strategy that you have found to be so helpful. And you've talked about some today with regards to recovery or the value of relationships and even self-compassion. But I'm just curious, in your daily routine, if there's one tool, strategy, piece of advice that you'd like to share back with the audience, something that you have found helpful that just helps you continue to not only optimize and show up in the roles that matter most to you, but also sustain that over time.
So I would say big thing is physically blocking out time for yourself. So in a day, I could leave my calendar open and that could be packed with meetings, but that's not going to make me productive and that's going to make me exhausted. So that by the time the workday is over and I'm ready to switch into home life or some sort of sport I'm doing, I'm not going to be ready for that. And so something that I do is I block out time to do maybe some tasks that need to be done where I don't actively have to be on Zoom, or I block out 30 minutes to have my meal and just sit down and, watch Real Housewives to relax. And then also, I think another thing to think about is find an activity where you feel rewarded to relax. So for me, it's reading. I just signed up to take a class with Hebrew College. So Thursday nights for the next 3 nights, my rest and relaxation activity is to learn about a topic I'm interested in. So I would suggest finding something like that, whatever works for you. And I know this isn't a specific action that you can take, but something I've been thinking about regarding our conversation is I also want to tell people it's never too late. Just because you're on the path you're on now, and if you have dreams, whether it's professionally or something that fuels your excitement in your personal life, it's never too late. You just need to think about how you get there next. I think that's something that people erroneously think about. They think if I'm not in my 20s or my teens, my path is already set for me. And that's not true. You can goals, you can make new things in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. And it's more to figure out how to get there.
Alexis, thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing that today and taking that time for yourself, and just a healthy reminder, like we are all kind of taking next steps in crafting our journey, and that can evolve. You're not locked in. So thank you so much today for joining the conversation. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you. You as well. It was great talking to you.